Okay, I'd like to call this meeting to order for the Township of Puslinch on January 20th, 2021. I'll start with roll call. Councillor Goyda.
Present.
Councillor Swillis.
Present.
Councillor Bailey.
Present.
And Councillor Bummer. He was there.
He's muted.
I don't know if this white box can unmute him or not. I will read, I'll just start reading this and Councillor Ballmer can just interject that he's present whenever he gets himself unmuted. All right. The purpose of this public meeting is to inform and provide the public with the opportunity to ask questions or to express views with respect to the township's proposed 2021 budget. Councillors are here to observe and listen to your comments. However, they will not make any decisions this evening. Township requests that you notify by email Mary Hassan at MHASAN, so Mary or mhassan at puslinch.ca, or by phone at 519-763-1226, extension 222, if you wish to be on record regarding this matter. Please note the meeting is video and audio recorded, and all electronic meetings are uploaded to the municipality's YouTube page. By registering to participate in the meeting by electronic means, you are consenting to have your likeness and comments recorded and posted on YouTube. The format of this public meeting is as follows. Mary Hassan, Director of Finance, Treasurer, will present the proposed 2021 budget and any further relevant information. Following this, the public can obtain clarification, ask questions, and express their views. Staff will attempt to answer questions or respond to concerns this evening. If this is not possible, staff will follow up and obtain this information. Responses will be provided when this matter is brought forward and evaluated by council at the February 10th, 2021 regular council meeting. So following presentations by Mary Hassan, Director of Finance, excuse me, I got a tickle, Treasurer. So I'll hand the floor over, excuse me. One thing I want to ask Ms. Hoyfox for the people in the gallery, their video is off and they are muted while the presentation is being presented by Ms. Hassan. And when you move them on, if they have their video turned off, it'll just be audio recorded. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, that's just for the participants in the gallery. Okay, Ms. Hassan, you may proceed when you're ready.
Thank you very much, Mayor Seeley. So I'll just quickly go through my presentation deck that was included with the agenda package for tonight. So as Mayor Seeley indicated, we are discussing the 2021 proposed budget public meeting. And Ms. Hoyt-Fox has shared the presentation actually for the public to see via Zoom as well. If you can change the slide, please. So today we're just going to discuss the budget process, what property taxes pay for in the township, change from the 2020 budget, the impacts of the proposed budget on taxpayers, what's included in the operating budget, 2021 capital budget and long-term forecast. So we have a long-term forecast for 10 years, and the township's discretionary and restricted reserves. So the main objectives of tonight is to educate and inform the public about the township's finances and the 2021 proposed budget, and to receive feedback that staff and council can consider before finalizing the budget at an upcoming council meeting. We will hold questions until the end of the presentation. If we could change the slide, please. So the budget process has been a long one. We commenced budget preparations in August and September, and this is typical practice for the township. October 28th, we presented the first draft of the capital budget to council. On November 25th, we presented the first draft of the operating budget to council. January 13th, we presented a revised budget to council, which included both capital and operating budget and what the impacts were at that time. And now tonight, we will be providing the public with an updated budget based on some direction that we received from council at the January 13th meeting. And I will be providing what the impact is for the various tax classes. The process does not end when the budget is adopted. The budget is our best estimate on our revenues and expenditures for the year. costs change and new projects will arise and projects may be delayed as we obtain better information. However, the budget process is necessary in order to set the property taxes to be collected for the 2021 year. Next slide, please. So this slide just discusses how property taxes are allocated between the 4 different property tax classes noted on this slide. And as you can see on this slide, the township receives a relatively small share of the total taxes that property owners pay in the township. Next slide, please. So this slide just discusses the 2021 proposed budget in comparison to the 2020 approved budget. And as you can see in the slide, the total capital tax levy compared to the operating tax levy is comparable to the 2020 budget. Next slide, please. So just further to the previous slide, 67% of the proposed tax levy is funding the operating budget, and the remaining 33% is funding the capital budget. And again, this remains consistent to the previous years. The next slide just discusses what services the township provides. And so the township provides parks and recreation services, fire and rescue services, public works, roads and related services, bylaw enforcement, planning and development, building services, and general government, which includes council and committees, corporate costs, and finance. Next slide, please. So this slide discusses how the tax levy has changed from 2020. So the next slide, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, will factor in assessment growth in the township and the change in taxes for the median typical property in the township. So as you can see from this slide, the total capital tax levy proposed for 2021 is no change from 2020. And the total operating tax levy is a small change from 2020 at approximately $97,000. Next slide, please. So now the next few slides are just going to discuss the impacts of the proposed budget on taxpayers. And so when determining the tax levy requirements, we review the assessment change determined by the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation for the median typical property. And this is done to ensure that the tax levy change is reasonable from the previous year. In 2021, the returned assessment roll has resulted in little to no assessment changes. The province postponed the 2021 reassessment update as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. We do see some assessment growth, however, in terms of new assessment growth in the township of 1.50% or 36.7 million. And this includes new construction and renovations. If there had not been any assessment growth in the township, the proposed 2021 budget would have resulted in a higher tax increase than what I'm indicating in my next slides. At 2.24% and $22.80 for just the township portion, and a blended tax increase of about 1.98% and $111.33 on the median typical single family home. However, the assessment growth has resulted in lower numbers for these, and I will discuss that in the next few slides. Next slide, please. So we look at the impacts for a single family home, a farmland property, a small retail commercial property, and a standard industrial property. So just so everyone is aware, the township and county tax rate is finalized upon county tax policy being finalized by county council later on in the year. I believe it's in May. And the county's proposed budget is scheduled to be approved later in January of 2021. The education tax rates will be finalized through regulation at a future date. And so the amounts noted in here are based on the draft education tax rates that the township recently received from the province. Next slide, please. So this slide discusses the proposed budget for a median typical single family home. And so the township tax increase is 0.93% and $9.47, with a blended tax increase of 1.74% and $97.99. And this is actually fairly good considering some of the implications of what the COVID-19 pandemic has brought upon for several different, for the municipal sector and others as well. So the next slide discusses what the impact is for the median typical farmland property. And so again, it's the 0.93% for the township tax increase and $2.79 for a blended tax increase. Sorry, for just the township portion. And then a blended tax increase of 1.74% or $28.90 for the typical farmland property. Next slide, please. Sorry, Ms. White Fox, can you just change it to the next slide? Oh yeah, excellent. Okay, so this is just the impact for the median typical retail commercial property. And so as you can see on this slide, the blended impact is actually a decrease based on the item that's contributing to the decrease is the decrease in the education tax rate for commercial properties as announced by the province recently. So the next slide is just discussing the industrial property and how that's impacted. And again, just similar to the commercial property, it's also seeing a decrease here. Next slide, please. So a draft bylaw was included with the agenda package. So the next few slides are just an overview of the 2021 proposed operating budget. Next slide, please. So this slide just discusses what share of the property tax each service represents. And as you can see, the percentages are quite similar to previous years, with public works being the highest and general government, then fire and rescue, parks and recreation, and some other ones below. But these percentages are consistent to previous years. Next slide, please. So this is just the total operating expenditures by type on this slide. Salaries, wages, and benefits higher than other items, and this is pretty typical for municipalities. If we could go to the next slide, please. So the total operating revenues by type, as you can see here, property taxes are the highest, with user fees and licenses below that, and payments in lieu of taxes and other levies. And so these percentages are typical to previous years as well. The next slide, please. So again, the draft 2021 proposed capital budget and long-term forecast was included in a draft bylaw as part of this agenda. And so the next few slides are just an overview of the projects that are being proposed for 2021. Next slide, please. So public works and parks are the highest, higher departments with capital items proposed for 2021. Corporate, and I can discuss some of these projects in more detail in the next few slides. So this slide just discusses what the proportion of funding sources are for the proposed capital budget for 2021. With grants being higher, and then tax levy and discretionary reserves. A big portion of the discretionary reserves is the asset management reserve that's funding asset replacement projects or infrastructure rehabilitation projects. Restricted reserves in there, that there's cash in lieu of parkland and development charges that are funding several projects. and the federal gas tax rebate. And this funding has typically been utilized for public works projects. So roads, bridges, culverts. Next slide, please. So this is the Public Works proposed budget for 2021. So some of the items in there include the bridge and culvert inspections, which are required every 2 years. A pickup truck, some roads projects, so concession 4, McLean Road West and McLean Road East. A stormwater management facility pond, some rehabilitation works required there. A closed circuit television inspection for the Carroll Pond drain. Gilmore Culvert to prepare for a future replacement or whatever is determined through that through the bridge and culvert inspection reports. Stormwater management pond inspections, storm sewer inspections and cleaning. This also includes a contribution to the gravel roads improvement discretionary reserve of $157,800, and this is actually quite a bit of an increase from what was contributed in the 2020 budget, so that's great. Hume Road Railway crossing upgrades at $80,000, and the transportation master plan, including condition index updates at $75,000. Next slide, please. The parks budget. Many of these projects are contingent on federal and provincial funding that the township has applied for. So phase 1 of the Parks Master Plan, approximately $1.3 million. Replacement of Badenoch Soccer Field 3-seat bleachers and replacement of lights at Old Morrison Park. Next slide, please. In the corporate department, there's a contribution to the asset management discretionary reserve of approximately $1.2 million. This is quite comparable to the previous year contribution, and it is in place in order to meet the target levels that have been recommended as part of our asset management plan in order to fund our infrastructure deficit. It includes computer equipment, corporate information technology discretionary reserve contribution, phase 3 of the marketing and branding implementation project, and that's also funded through grants, and a used scissor lift. Next slide, please. So this is just a couple more departments. So the Puss Lynch Community Center kitchen renovation, including the kitchen washroom. In the Fire and Rescue Services department, there's the Aerial 33 truck tire replacements, structural firefighter gear, and some work required as it relates to an analysis of the options associated with fire services. The municipal office includes a space needs analysis as well. Next slide, please. This slide basically provides the 2021 capital budget and forecast. So as I previously indicated, our capital budget and forecast is over 10 years. And there's just a line in there that just explains that our average expenditures, as noted in our capital budget and forecast, is approximately $4.06 million every year. Next slide, please. So the next few slides are just discussing our discretionary and restricted reserves and how these balances have changed over the years based on our audited financial statements. So as you can see, the balances in our discretionary reserves have been steadily increasing, which is great to see. The balances in our restricted reserves have also been steadily increasing, with a big portion of the 2019 balance in the restricted reserves as it relates to the gas tax funding. The township received a top-up payment in 2019 that will be expended in 2020. So prior to budget approval, Council will be receiving the balances in discretionary and restricted reserves as of December 31st, 2020, and projected over the forecast period. The next slide just discusses the budgeted contributions to capital and operating discretionary reserves, and these remain consistent to previous years. Again, the majority of the capital contribution to the capital discretionary reserve relates to the contribution into the asset management discretionary reserve in order for the township to maintain the target balance as recommended in its asset management plan. Also, as I previously indicated, council in a previous year established a gravel roads improvement discretionary reserve for the purpose of improving the township's gravel roads, and an increase to the contribution to this reserve was made and was proposed for 2021 as authorized through council. And so the contribution that's noted in 2021 is approximately $157,800. So the majority of the operating contribution to discretionary reserves, it relates to the aggregate levy, and 50% of the aggregate levy received is contributed to the aggregate levy discretionary reserve in order to fund a public works capital project. So that's the end of the presentation. I would welcome any questions or comments.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Hassan, for your great presentation, and I'll ask Ms. White Fox to move individuals over from the gallery for questions to staff.
Okay, so if the attendees in the attendee section could use the raise your hand feature if you do have any questions or comments or look to speak.
You find that button if you mouse over near the bottom. Oh, there you go. They found it. There he is, Mr. Joy.
Yes, can everybody hear me?
Sure can.
Okay, so I noticed in the plan that phase one was going to cost about $1.34 million. So I'm just kind of curious on what plans, I know there's a tender out for the soccer field, but what other plans are you doing for phase one?
Oh, I can speak to that. I'm just reviewing the capital budget sheet, and Mr. Fowler, if you have anything to add, please just add if I miss anything. So phase one of the Parks Master Plan includes, basically we've applied to the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program for this phase, and it includes soccer field lighting and amenities, including benches and bleachers, parking lot upgrades, light poles and fixtures for pathways, parking lot, shade structures, paving and hard surfacing for asphalt walkways, picnic shelters, soccer field bleacher and bench pads, some soft landscape and some site furnishings. However, this isn't not finalized at this point. This will be reported back to council should the township be successful in its grant application. We're still waiting. We're still waiting to hear from the province and the federal government to determine if we are successful.
Okay, because on the tender itself that went out for the soccer field, there was no culverts or lighting in that tender. So I was kind of a bit confused when you say it's included, but it's not. So I'm a little lost.
So I can quickly just discuss, so the tender that went out is just for the back soccer fields construction. And Mr. Fowler can maybe just explain it a little bit more. We did recently, maybe Mr. Fowler can just explain the tender documentation a bit more.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Good evening, Bruce. How are you tonight?
I'm fine, thank you.
Good. So we've broken it down into phases. The first phase will be the actual construction of the adult pitch. It includes the rough and final grade, topsoil placement, and turf seed to be placed on the playing field, where the buffer areas will be hydro seeded. That's basically what's encompassed in the first phase. Again, as Ms. Hassan stated, it is contingent on grant funding. Whereas if we do secure this funding, then the implementation of, we'll say, the extras at this point, which would include the lighting, bleachers, etc., can be implemented probably into 2022.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious to see whether or not there was being excluded or It's later on. Okay.
At this point, to play it safe, it's going to be later on, especially with the difficult year of 2020. Management and council made the decision that we were still going to go ahead and get the construction started. It's just all the extra amenities will be on a more yearly time frame now.
Okay. I'm assuming that building it later will cost extra if you have to dig in the culverts. Is that considered?
It's not an astronomical amount to come in later. There is minimal impact to the established turf. A lot of the conduit will be placed through directional boring. And once the light standards are placed, again, directional boring is used to place the poles. So you'll have a couple spots where conduit pops up to join, but
Yeah.
it's not like an entire trench around the soccer pitch. So
Okay.
our ball diamond at the PCC was done this way, and it was quite successful.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Okay, Mr. Joy, do you have further questions?
No, I think that's it for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I shall move Mr. Allen over.
Yes, I'll move him over now.
Thank you. Hello, Mr. Allen. Maybe not. Mr. Allen, you're muted if you are trying to speak.
How's that?
There we go.
Okay. For the 2021 budget, what was the assumption on salary change?
So I can speak quickly to that as well. Council and staff recommended 0% cost of living adjustment because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So there was no cost of living adjustment. However, there are staff that may move between different steps depending on where they are. So that was one component associated with it. And there were some recommendations that came out of an organization review in 2020 that also impacted the budget a little bit, but that's phased over a couple years.
Thank you. How many days will the township facility be closed in 2021 due to COVID? What's the assumption?
I would maybe leave that for Mr. Swendinger. And by closed, do you mean closed to the public, Mr. Allen?
That's correct, which will affect your revenue.
So you're meaning the recreation facilities?
All facilities.
That's very difficult to predict because we don't know what type of restrictions or recommendations will be coming out from the provincial government or the health unit. So I apologize, we really can't answer that. It's going to be determined as we go from the situation resulting from the pandemic.
So in the budget assumptions, you're assuming that all facilities are open?
I believe, and maybe Ms. Hassan, you can remind me of this. We did make an assumption for it being closed for a portion of the year, but not the entire year, right?
Yes, that's correct.
So what was the assumption? How many days?
I believe it was, sorry, I'll just look into that.
Sure. The next question I got is, what is the fully loaded expense for a full-time employee for the township?
That's another difficult one to answer, Mr. Allen, because different employees have different pay grades and they're in their grids. Ms. Hassan, I don't know if you can try to make an attempt to answer that.
I would agree with you, Mayor Seeley, that different employees are in different spots in the salary grid. So it'd be difficult to, sorry.
Perhaps.
That's fine.
Are all full-time employees have full benefits, and benefits are 25% of the salary?
Ms. Hassan had to deal with her family.
I can keep going. We can back to that, Mayor, if you'd like.
I would just give Ms. Hassan a minute because she's going to need to answer most of your questions. I mean, staff can also respond to these, if those aren't specific to the 2021 budget, if you're wanting information on staff salary and how much generally benefits cost, that can be provided at a later date.
Fair enough. It is directly in response to 2021 budget.
Mr. Allen, I would say permanent full-time employees were legislated as part of OMERS to provide it to all permanent full-time employees. And also our benefits, our group benefits are also provided to all permanent for full-time employees.
Okay. Next question would be regarding the departmental leaders or heads of the department. I'm not sure what the township calls them. Did they create the numbers that are in the proposed budget document?
So they, as indicated in my presentation, we do begin budget preparation in August and September, and they prepare them, and we work collaboratively together to ensure that everything is covered in the budget.
So if I had a specific question relative to roads, Mr. Fowler could answer that question.
Possibly. You can ask your question, Mr. Allen.
I'll move on. I just wanted to know whether I should ask it to him. So what direction were the department heads given relative to the 2021 budget task?
Mr. Schwendinger, did you give your department heads direction on the budget?
Sure, yes, I can answer that. What we told them was that we need to consider the uniqueness of the challenges that this year presents resulting from the pandemic and the economic impacts on our whole country, let alone the municipality, so that the projects that come forward need to be justified, that it has to be essential that they move forward now. If there's anything that can be deferred or held off to some point in the future, that should definitely be done, and that we should be pursuing any and all additional funding opportunities that we can for any specific projects that we bring forward, and that they should also review the existing expenditures to make sure that those levels are still appropriate if there's any type of reductions that could be implemented there. So the general guidance and direction given to staff was we need to make this budget and any changes to the budget as small as we possibly can to reflect the concerns of the current situation.
Thank you. Was there any specific direction given on to adding headcount?
As part of the budget is your question, or?
It is.
Not specifically as part of the budget, but what we did do earlier in the year, there was an organization review that was undertaken, and that went through the council process, and council made their decisions based on recommendations received, and then we proceeded based on the council direction for that, and then that was incorporated into the budget.
Okay. And did the department heads get asked to quantify in dollars potential savings?
So I can just speak to that. Department heads are always looking for savings in order to present a reasonable budget to council. That's part of their work in August and September.
So do you have a document indicating what those savings would be?
Well, as we present the budget to council and as council provides us with direction, those are incorporated in the reports that are done as part of the budget.
So to further on, did council ask the CAO to quantify in dollars potential operational savings?
I don't believe so, Mr. Allen. This is very much a ongoing process, and it's just, I can give you some examples. Mr. Fowler reached out to his counterparts at the county and found savings and purchases for a backhoe and different pieces of equipment, but we very much leave that at the department head level to find the best bang for our buck. And I don't believe we track that per se. We do approve purchases and we may hear verbal updates from our staff. And but ultimately council makes those decisions.
But the council have a document indicating that the township department heads could save X amount of dollars by doing the following.
I do not believe so, Mr. Schwindinger.
No, I don't believe there's a summarizing document, but what we do when we prepare the budget is we also look at the actuals. We go line by line through every account that we have, and if the expenditure one year is shown that we didn't utilize the entire funds that were in there, then we reduce that for the coming year. So those are automatic reductions, like Mrs. Sand referenced. That's just an ongoing thing. We don't just do it at budget time. That's what we're doing all year round. So that I don't believe that that's specifically recorded that a specific line item was reduced by $3,000, for example. That's just done to match what the actuals are, and then that's how we can end up with how we ended up with a much smaller increase that we're looking at this year than typically happens, because all those steps were put in place along with a number of other decisions.
So do you have a slide that would indicate the plus and minus that would add up to those total?
No, like I indicated, I don't think we specifically track it from that perspective, no.
Okay, so the proposed tax levy is an increase of 96,661 on slide 9. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And then the following slides discuss what the impact is on the proposed taxpayer.
Fair enough. So when are you projecting that the 2020 actual expenditures will be on budget?
We are projecting a small surplus.
And what
Sorry, Mr. Allen, I don't have the exact amount at this time because we are still receiving many invoices and we are still working on our fiscal year-end processes.
That's fair. And what happens to the surplus?
Council's direction in previous years, as recommended by staff, was that surplus funds go to the asset management discretionary reserve, but that will be presented to council once a surplus amount is known, and council will direct staff as to where the surplus should go.
Okay, thank you. And in all of the documents, what I viewed was the 2021 budget is being compared to the 2020 budget. Is that correct?
Yes, that's our typical comparison. We're comparing it to the previous year.
So if you in fact do have a surplus in 2020, your increase of expenses is actually going to be higher than your 2.24%.
Sorry, Mr. Alvin, I'm not.
Okay, so if you actual in 2020 of less than budget, you'll have a surplus. And yet your assumption is that your 2021 budget is a percentage of the 2020 budget.
I'm going to try and answer that, Ms. Hassan. Mr. Allen, no, that does not mean there will be a further percentage increase. The surplus
Right. So
is hold on one second, is found within the proposed 2020 budget. And what has happened is that budget lines were not spent. And then so there's remaining funds, and they can be anywhere from $10 to more. They accumulate, and then that money is left over, and then it's put to the reserve, as Ms. Hassan indicated, and used for paving roads, fixing bridges, culverts, whatever it may be. But it does not equate to a higher tax rate.
I appreciate that, but just so my question is, 2021 budget proposed will be a higher percentage than 2.24 over 2020 actual if there is in fact a surplus. You will be spending more money in 2021 than in 2020.
I would disagree with that because we're not spending the money that's left over from 2020. It's
Correct.
going into the asset management reserve. And then in theory, that money would then be there in 2021, depending if, certain costs can go up. Right now, oil's at whatever it is, $50 a barrel. Well, it's one crisis and it could go to 150 a barrel. So.
Okay, thank you. I've got a couple more questions.
Sure.
So, slide 54 in administration. If I got the numbers right, which shows full-time wages from in 2018 actual of roughly 238 going to 389 in 2021. Is that slide 54?
Sorry, Mr. Allen, did you say, can you repeat those numbers?
Administration, full-time wages, 2018 actual is 238,000.
Okay,
So I got the right slide.
yes.
So I'm concerned about the increases. So I'm assuming that you've added full-time headcount. So my question is, what was the full-time headcount of employees in 2018? And if you need to come back, I'm okay with that.
Yes, I don't have that number on me right now.
But there is, I'm assuming that it's a full-time headcount increase to get that amount of money. Correct?
Yes, I believe there was a headcount increase in administration, but Mr. Schwendiger can speak more to that.
Sure, we can get those exact numbers for you, but if what you're equating to the 2018 actuals to the 2021 proposed, what I would also suggest is that during that time, there were a number of vacancies where people weren't in positions, so that would result in a lower than budgeted expense there, so it's not really apples to apples. But we can find those numbers and have those available.
Okay, so I'd be interested in the justification for adding full-time employees. So you could put that in the package as well. So if I'm reading the slide right, there's no part-time wages in the 2021 budget. So why is there $500 budgeted in for overtime?
Because there is overtime applicable for full-time employees.
So we pay overtime to full-time employees, salaried employees. Is that correct?
Yes, it's in accordance with our overtime in lieu policy.
Thank you. Did not know that, so I appreciate that. So there's a significant increase in professional development, going from 15,600 to 26,000 in 21. So what's the specific details for the increase?
Sorry, Mr. Allen, I see a decrease in professional development from the 2020 budget to the 2021 budget.
Well, I'm going from 2018.
Okay, so that is consistent with what Mr. Schwendinger has indicated, that there are vacancies in various years, and so professional development doesn't always get fully used up.
And
but it is a decrease from the 2020 budget.
The 2020 budget doesn't move on. So I would be looking for what the specific details of the amount of money we're spending on professional development in administration relative to other departments. And I'll make the point in a moment.
So administration also includes several corporate professional development requirements as it relates to the Health and Safety Act and the Occupational Health and, there's different acts that require it. And so there are some items in the corporate professional development account as it relates to administration.
I appreciate that. And I'd be looking for if it's 20,000 out of the 26, it makes it interesting. Okay. seeing as I'm taking too much time, I would move to perhaps finance then. Same questions relative to full-time headcount in finance.
Yes, so Mr. Schwendinger has already indicated that we will provide the headcount information.
Thank you. So I'm interested in why the township would be paying bank service charges. There's 8,000 in finance and another 3,500 in building.
So bank service charges, a lot of that relates to credit card payments, debit payments. We have done a lot of credit card payments and enabled more convenient payment methods for customers. So that's what a lot of that relates to.
And would you say that's 90% of that cost?
I can't say the exact percentage, but it is a significant amount of the cost.
Okay. Public Works. I'm interested that if I saw the documents correctly, it's the department with the highest expenses overall, but there's only $1,420 for professional development. And I'm thinking that's very low relative to other departments. And shouldn't we be supporting Mr. Fowler for him and his own team for more professional development?
I can speak to that. Currently, Public Works and Parks do not require a lot of, whether it be additional training or schooling. The opportunities do exist if presented to management and council. At this time, all employees that are required to have, whether it be their operating certificates, safety equipment certificates, are all up and upholding. So it's kind of like apples to oranges, where other departments within the township require different upgrading and training as far as, and even with membership renewals. So at this point, Public Works is fully covered in the requirements and training that is required for the township.
Appreciate that, Mr. Fowler. I would like to see you and your team get more professional development areas that are not requirements. I see you as the front, the face of the township for most taxpayers. And there may be an opportunity for you to take that as a professional development area for your team and move forward. But thank you for the answer. I have a question for council, and I appreciate they're not obligated to answer it, but I will put it out for the record. I'm interested whether to express empathy and demonstrate some leadership to those in the township who have lost their jobs or otherwise affected by COVID. Would the council consider taking the following actions? 1, no travel in 2021, which appears, if the numbers are correct, is a $4,200 saving. 2 is no professional development in 2021, which is a further $3,200 for saving. And then the third request would be for you to look at would be take a 10% wage decrease, which would be an additional 10,000 in savings. So I would put that out there for the council to consider.
Thank you, Mr. Allen, for your questions to council. I will mention to you that due to COVID, most of the conferences that council would attend have gone virtual. And due to the cost prohibitive nature of them, I believe the last one they wanted $500 or $600 per counselor to register. Our council already opted not to attend those conferences with the taxpayer in mind. And Mr. Allen, if council were to adopt your recommendations and remove those monies, then what you're going to do is you're going to create a situation where the surplus, which is funding your asset management plan, is driven down. Then we're going to have to raise taxes to fund the asset management plan for when we build roads and culverts and bridges. So leaving these monies in there helps your council not have to raise taxes for the future to build these expensive projects. So I believe that that should satisfy, and if council members desire, they can answer your question privately or after the meeting. Unless I'll open it up, but I don't believe they'll want to discuss. Any council member want to answer those questions? Okay, Mr. Allen, do you have further questions?
I got a couple of document requests then, thank you. Wanted to know if I could get an Excel file showing the department expenses, all of the department's expenses formatted. So it's very similar to slide 34, only instead of by department, it's by the township. So you can see what the expenses for full-time wages have done for the township from 2018 to 21.
Sorry,
That's
can you
what-
repeat that? Can you repeat that again for me, please?
Sorry, I'm looking for a summary slide for all the total township expenses. It's very similar to slide 34, only it's been broken down by individual departments. And so if I ask a question, what is the salary for full-time employees from 2018 to 2021 budget? I don't think it's in the deck.
Mr. Allen, I appreciate that you want to go line by line through the budgets from 2018 to 2021. The purpose of today is to the proposed 2021 budget.
Engage.
So if you want additional information, significant details like that, could you contact staff after the budget meeting? And I'm sure they can provide all those details for you.
Thank you. And then I would like to make a recommendation to change the process of the budgeting. And I'll give you a little bit of rationale. So my suggestion is that the public have at least 10 working days to look at the documents presented. So the township staff's been working on the budget for over 100 working days. That's slide 4. And yet as a taxpayer, I was given 3 working days to review 80 slides of detail.
I can speak to that. So, Mr. Allen, we have been providing budgets through public forum, through council's meetings. And so there have been different reiterations of what's been provided on, I believe, 3 other occasions. So this is a reiterative process.
Okay, thank you. It would have been nice to have, when the council supported this proposed budget, more time to look at it. And I appreciate that if I missed the reiterative process, then I'll look at it further in the future. I thank everybody for their time. This is my first time to look at the budget of a township in any detail. So I apologize if I've taken too much time or didn't understand the terminology. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome. Thank you for your questions. All right. I don't see any other hands up. Let me ask the attendees one more time if they have any further questions. All right. Okay, I declare this public meeting closed. Council will take no action on this matter tonight. Staff will be reporting at the February 10th, 2020 regular council meeting with a recommendation for council's consideration. If you wish to receive further notification on this matter, notify by email Mary Hassan at mhassan@pussonch.ca or by phone at 519-763-1226, extension 222. Only those persons who leave their names will be provided further notification. If you wish to speak to the matter when it is brought before council in the future, you must register as a delegation with the township clerk prior to the meeting. I think that concludes our meeting. Thank you, everyone. Matthew, were you able to join us, I hope?